Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we will be listening to the first part of What If Didn't Believe All Might and Remained Quirkless. If you enjoy, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing down below, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you get notified when videos go live. Now, without further ado, let's get into the video. Chapter 1, the chapter was too long so little actually changes, whoops. If 20% of the world had quirks, there should be 40 quirkless students in Izuku's year, 200 in his apartment block, 25 million in Japan and 840 million worldwide. Midoriya Izuku shouldn't have been an anomaly. Kaken and his explosions should have been an anomaly. An early breed of the Doomsday quirks. Midoriya Izuku tried to explain that once. He stood up with a PowerPoint and explained it was illogical. Kaken shouldn't have children with anyone with a powerful quirk. We're only the 5th generation. Scientists say our grandchildren will be powerful enough to eradicate humans. He explained before pointing to Kaken, through genetic breeding, Kaken quirk will pass on with some elements of his wife's. If he were to marry Ie-san, their child would create explosive whirlwinds. This could easily destroy a town at a young age. Midoriya Izuku failed that presentation. His teacher marked it down for incorrect facts and stuttering. Another student explained why the genocide of the quirkless was necessary. He wasn't allowed to leave that presentation, not if Kaken couldn't leave during his. It resulted in a new burn on his shoulder. After all, Deku was better off dead. That was a fact. A law no one spoke about. Everyone was waiting for Kaken to kill him. If they weren't, they didn't know his quirk yet, or they were his mom. When he started walking to school alone, Izuku became well known among muggers. The rumors got round to them that a quirkless kid walked that way and jumping him was the best course of action. He doesn't care too much. It was part of his daily life. It'd been like that for 14 years. Izuku Midoriya life has been on replay since he was 4. The All Might figure that fell on the floor is now safely tucked away on his shelf. You can't take items to school unless they help with your quirk. Izuku's already an oddity, he brings his notebooks in regardless. The notebooks give him something to do. When the teacher took everyone outside for quirk practice, he tried to use them hide during discussions. That was unfortunately, the ending class. There was no way out of it. There was no way to stop the teacher from calling Izuku's name. That was how Izuku Midoriya ended up fishing through the school's koi pond. Kaken's words rang in his head. If you want to be a hero so badly, go pray for a quirk in your next life and take a swan dive off the roof. That isn't food. He murmured to himself. The pages were dripping wet and the ink had smudged. It soaked his hands, but waving it in the air would be useless. He flicked through some pages. His fingers folded through them with care. Every page had been destroyed. If he placed them on a radiator when he got home, they would stick together. The damage was irreversible. Taking deep breath in and deep breath out, he reasoned it was okay. Izuku could always rewrite the notebook. It had only been close to halfway done. It wouldn't be the biggest rewrite he had done. His best bet was to get home and dry the book before he lost even more of it to a bullet. Either way, why did Kaken thoughts matter? He shoved the answer coming from the question out of his head. Izuku headed down the shortcut. Getting home needed to be his priority. Then he could focus on heroes until he passed out. He kept his head down in hope it would hide his face. The green fluffy mop hid well in the darkness of the alleyways. The black uniform disguised Midoriya well enough. If it weren't for his murmuring, it'd be impossible to tell he was there. His bright red shoes rattled a drain. The metal against his soul echoed across the tunnel. Izuku had alerted a being hiding under the sewers. It removed the plate as the child neared the exit. Green sludge crawled along the floor and Izuku only realized once it was on his shoe. Izuku faced a being, what could have been a human. There was no skin, instead a murky green liquid it could control. The only sign of it being a human was the eyes that were held in the depths of it. It towered over Izuku, as it looked down upon him. The creature blocked all the light from Izuku's view. The eyes rolled round before settling on where he stood. The sewer juice began to transform into something that vaguely looked like a grin. Izuku's legs started to shake. He couldn't run as dread creeped up his spine. There was no form of escape, not when his leg was stuck to the ground. A medium-sized invisibility cloak. The villain gushed before he leapt forward. Izuku could run. His legs flew off the ground as he twisted around. His attempts were futile. Sludge started to wrap itself around his leg. It pulled him into the sludge's range. It started to wrap around him like a cocoon before heaving itself down his mouth. Izuku wanted to gag as the drain juice forced itself down him. It clogged up his lungs, making breathing difficult. His notebook lay discarded on the floor. He clawed at the gunk. He wanted it out. He needed it out. "Don't worry, I'm just going to take over your body." "Don't worry" was the worst advice Izuku had ever heard. And he's been told to give up unless he wants to die since he was 4. He didn't stop thrashing his legs in hope the red sneakers would hit anything physical. "Calm down," the villain hissed. "It'll only hurt for 45 seconds, you'll feel better soon." Izuku gurgled in response. It kept some of the sludge from entering his body. The monster tried harder at the struggle. "You'll feel better soon." Midoriya didn't know what was going through his mind when he wasted some precious air to say, "I can't breathe," while he kept tugging. He knew his hands were going through. There was no way he could grab a fluid. The villain kept monologuing. "Thanks kid, you're my hero." Izuku was forced to look into the eyes. There was a static in his brain when the monster said that. He didn't want to be this thing's hero. "I didn't expect that to come here." The monster looked away and Izuku didn't notice. He could only focus on the strength being ripped away from him. His legs couldn't keep kicking. His hands were losing strength. It felt like Izuku was dying. God, he was dying. That was it. That was how Izuku died. The tears from lack of breath found a new purpose. He refused to believe this was the end. Black dots dotted his vision. Someone, that was all he wanted. He just needs someone to come and see this. Even if it didn't survive, he wouldn't be a tool for a villain. It was a deus ex machina moment when Izuku saw the drain flying open. He forced his eyes open long enough to see a silhouette. His oxygen-deprived brain recognized them. He just couldn't place a name with them. Izuku blacked out after the sentence, "It's okay now, young man." Being slapped hurt. The stinging sensation had no time to settle before another hand made contact with his cheek. Izuku started to come to his sense at the third hit, but his eyes only opened after 10 more. A white smile met his face. Everyone knew who the smile belonged to. Izuku was no different from anyone else his age. It didn't take a genius to recognize the number 1 hero, All Might. The hero looked so different in person. His face was as tanned and his hair did stick up naturally. Izuku wanted to pat it. He really hoped it wasn't gelled. The urge was cut off when All Might spoke. "I'm glad you're okay." All Might scratched the back of his neck while he looked away sheepishly. "I'm sorry about getting you caught up in my villain fight." Izuku shook his head. All Might didn't need to be sorry, it was a joy. It wasn't every day you got saved by your own hero. He didn't get a chance to explain that if anyone it should be Izuku before All Might continued speaking. "I don't usually make mistakes like this, but I was in high spirits on my day off in a new place." All Might wiped the sweat off his forehead. "But you were a big help." "Thanks." He dug his hand into his pocket before pulling out a plastic bottle. Glaring out of the bottle was a blank black pupil in a yellow iris. All Might was thanking Izuku, which didn't seem right. The fanboy never imagined the number 1 would recognize him, let alone thank him. He had to get an autograph. He couldn't find his notebook that lay a few feet away from him. When his eyes landed on it, he reached for it. Delicately, he flipped towards a page. The question, "Can I have an autograph?" was stolen by the marker already spread across the pages. Izuku could feel himself start to cry. It'd be a family heirloom. He bowed as far down as he could. His head could barrel through the floor and it still wouldn't have been enough. Words nor actions could describe or show his gratitude. "Okay." All Might flashed a thumbs up, used to children's fanboying. "I need to take this guy to the police station. See you on the other side of the screen." All Might waved goodbye to Izuku before walking through his stretches. Squatting and bending his knees as he prepped for a jump. He wouldn't be sticking round then, and neither should Izuku. Something kept the student from leaving. He'd asked everyone. He had asked his mother, his teacher, and Kiken. He needed All Might's opinion. The hero had said it in an interview once, that the quirk didn't make the hero. That had been the second best day in Izuku's life other than when he saw that video for the first time. He wanted to ask, but the words got clogged in his throat. There were so many things he wanted to ask. Could someone without a quirk become a hero? What was UA like? Would Izuku face discrimination there? Why was All Might in Japan? Was the crime rates rising, meaning Izuku would start to see more muggers? That was how Izuku Midoriya found himself clinging to the number 1 hero's leg as he jumped into the air. The wind blowed on his face. His nose began to tingle from the rush of air. The air force made his screams illegible. "Young man. You need to let go. I know you're a fanboy, but this is too much." All Might yelled. His voice was clear in comparison to the harsh wind that came from traveling in the air. Izuku tried to make a protest, but it only came out as jumbled. They landed on a building quick enough. The urgency that radiated off All Might infected the rooftop. Izuku had to take a few deep breaths. Having skin back on his face had never felt so refreshing. It was like walking out of a cold shower. He rubbed his cheek. "Good grief." All Might proclaimed a few seconds after landing. "I'm sure if you talk to the people downstairs they'll let you down." He started to walk to the end of the roof. "Now I really am out of time. I must go." Izuku snapped back to reality. He outstretched his hand, desperate to meet the fabric of the hero's t-shirt. He missed, but the action caught the man's attention. "I will not wait," he snapped. Izuku's eyes widened and he retraced his hand in so it hung limply by his side. Tears collected in his eyes as he shouted as quietly as he could muster, "Can someone without a quirk be like you?" "Without a quirk?" All Might asked. He punctuated the end with a cough before smoke surrounded him. Izuku took a step back. The smog clouded the transformation that took place. The wind from the building blew it away once completed. Where the hero once stood, was a cripple of who he once was. Small Might coughed from smoke inhalation. Blood spluttered out from his mouth. Izuku's monologue was cut off when he caught sight. Izuku Midoriya screeched. He peered round to try and see where the real All Might was. "You're deflating. So skinny. Fake. You were a fake." He continued to splutter out words. "I am All Might." Midoriya, Izuku screamed again. Small Might didn't seem shocked by the reaction, even if he was disappointed. He collapsed with his back to the rails. "Now that you've seen me like this, young man, make sure you don't write about it online. Even on accident." Then, completely unprompted, All Might pulled up his t-shirt. Izuku wanted to gag. The wound was a sickly red, as if it had been angered. It collapsed into his chest. The image burned itself into his mind. "It's an injury I got from an enemy's attack 5 years ago. Half my respiratory organs were destroyed and I lost my whole stomach. I've become emaciated from repeated surgeries and the after effects. Right now, I can only be a hero 3 hours a day." The fight was not made public. I asked that it was not made public. I will save people with a smile. The symbol of peace cannot be daunted by evil. I smile to show the pressure of heroes and to trick the fear inside of me. Izuku's whole world was crumbling down. He refused to believe it was real, yet all he could do was gasp as the story continued. Pros risk their life every day. I cannot simply say you can become a pro without a power. If you want to help others, then you could also become a policeman. They're often teased because they have villains delivered to their door, but it is also a fine occupation. It's not bad to dream, but you also have to consider what's realistic, young man. All Might walked towards the exit from the roof before he shut the door behind himself. Izuku puked all over the floor. Tears started to fall. Control might have been ripped from his body as he collapsed onto the ground. How could All Might have said that? He just needed to hear the kind words of someone who believed in him. The number 1 hero couldn't have spared a heartstring. Izuku rubbed his tears away. All Might didn't mean any harm, but the image of his stomach wound flashed through Izuku's mind. A few mean words couldn't have been enough for a boy without hope. Instead, he ripped any hope from his fruitless heart as well. Izuku had seen the villain attack. He had no intention of jumping in. Going that way had been a coincidence. It was on the way to his house after all. Except when he got close enough to see who was in the attack, his heart stopped. Kiken. In the villain's hands, suffocating and suffering the same way Izuku had. The way Izuku had let him. The heroes were talking, discussing what to do. It had to be more than 45 seconds. Time was warping for the green-haired boy. He could hear other people talking and discussing what was going on. How long had it already been destroyed for? Izuku could only shake while his thoughts went frantic. No one could do anything, no one could do anything. If a hero didn't arrive soon, it'd be over. Over for Kiken and anyone else the villain came across. His mind had been in an overload and his legs started running. His hands had clawed at the sludge while he threw his notebook at the eye. All Might stood up even with his injury. The weather changed to tip down with rain with one punch. The sludge flew in the air. Heroes and the news stepped in to collect statements or deal with the damage. Geez, there's a limit to how rash you can be. Izuku snapped out from his haze. The heroes were chastising his actions, yet the words washed over him. He just wanted to go home and curl into his bed and sleep. It never seemed to end until reporters came. They swarmed the heroes, allowing Izuku his chance to escape into the alleyways. Walking home from the beach had a kind of peace associated with it. Being near the crashing sea soothed him, washed over the thoughts. You think you can look down on me? Kiken yelled. Izuku focused his mind on the sea. He never intended to look down on Kiken or make a difference. That wasn't the intention, even if he did it in the process. The rest of the conversation floated away. Distantly, Izuku was aware of what his friend was saying, when he turned around and stomped away. It didn't feel like he had missed anything. Continuing his walk alone, Izuku looked up to where Hihao stood. His hand was a second away from the metal when a voice screamed, "I am here." Izuku turned around to see All Might standing in front of him. His muscles were still inflated. "All Might? Why are you here? You were surrounded by reporters minutes ago." Izuku responded, but All Might laughed. Getting away from them was easy because All Might posed as he deflated with an explosion. All Might. He stabilized himself before facing Izuku again. They looked at each other eye to eye. "Young man, I came with thanks, corrections, and an apology. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't shared your story, I would be a man in a bodysuit who only preached. That can't be. It was my fault in the first place. I got in the way, I made everything worse thanks to my quirklessness." Izuku protested. His voice quietened as he continued. All Might cut him off. "It was because of you. Timid quirkless you at the scene that I took action. That I was able to act." Izuku turned to face All Might. His face was filled with wonder. His lips parted in a subtle jaw drop. It held a passive composure, but the eyes told All Might everything he needed to know. "Top heroes have tales from their school days," he said. "Most of their stories have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had the chance to think." The words reminded Izuku of his mother's frantic apologies. They were the words he wanted to hear back when he was 4. "You can be a hero. Are you serious?" Izuku asked. He could feel tears building under his eyes that he blinked back. All Might's hands were extended out as he offered Izuku his chance to become a hero. Every part of Izuku was screaming to take the praise, but licking it left a bitter taste in his mouth. The drop of the pin hadn't come yet. His mother didn't believe in him, and neither would his childhood friend. Maybe All Might was different. He had to be different, or else he would have left Izuku with the loss earlier. It made Izuku feel light, as if his feet were dangling off the ground thanks to a levitation quirk. Hearing the words "you can be a hero" was enough for Izuku to drop onto his knees. Tears fell freely down his face. He saw no harm in letting them stay. He clutched his jacket over his heart and sobbed. "You are worthy of inheriting my power." All Might continue. His skeletal hands were outstretched as if he awaited birds to fly through him. Izuku forced himself to untuck his chin to look up at the hero. Blinking back tears, he whispered loudly, "Inherit your quirk." He snorted up the snot running down and faced the man. His mouth gaped slightly from shock. "What's with that face?" All Might chuckled. Instantly, Izuku bit his lip and wiped his eyes. There was no time to compose himself before All Might dawdled along to get closer. "It's just a suggestion. The real show starts after this." Once close enough, he raised a finger and yelled, "Listen, young man, you need to decide whether or not you accept my power." Blood spurted from the hero's mouth. Izuku watched as it formed a puddle in front of him. His leg was bended to avoid staining his trousers. His hero wiped the blood off of his chin. The words washed over Izuku. The hero must be waiting for a response of any kid, yet his mind was in an overdrive. How could he pass a quirk down? He had never heard of a quirk like that. What was All Might's quirk? The news and forums speculated it was a strength enhancer. Why would he pass it down to Izuku when there were so many people more worthy? Izuku had jumped in to save Kiken. Could quirkless Izuku even have a quirk? He didn't think so. All that mattered was his pinky joint that prevented him from having one. Was All Might's quirk magically grow a pinky toe? No. All Might showed sure signs of a strength quirk. Can you repeat that? Izuku ended up asking instead. Chapter 2, One for All seems like a joke and it isn't a funny one. Should you inherit my power, you can become a hero. All Might repeated, his words were straight to point. A plaster had just been ripped off Izuku when he removed the sugar coating. He could feel the tears come back. This time, no amount of blinking would get rid of them. Did you mean what you said on the rooftop? Izuku asked. He didn't know why, but he just had to know. It was stupid that he wanted to find out more pointless details. Something tugged at the back of his mind. This offer didn't feel any different to Kiken's words earlier in intention. All Might started to answer his question when Izuku clarified, that I can't be a hero without a quirk. All Might stumbled as he rearranged his words. You have the heart to be a hero, but your lack of a quirk holds you back. That is why I am offering you my quirk, because you are worthy of that title. Izuku nodded. He gave his best smile to the hero. Thank you, All Might, that was all I wanted to hear. He pushed the hero's hands back to his side so it could hang limply. You don't have to take pity on me though. I did something today. I can focus on something more realistic now. Izuku backed away to allow the hero to walk away. I'm not taking pity on you, I truly believe you should be my successor. All Might said. He looked at the green-haired boy who was unwilling to listen. You shouldn't give up your dreams yet. UA exams are in 10 months. That is plenty enough time to prepare. Izuku wanted to laugh, he could never make it in 10 months. He didn't want to waste the number one hero's time, when there were people like Kiken. People who were already on their way to being number one. All Might, be realistic. I'm never going to be ready in 10 months. Everyone else will have been preparing for years. Find someone who's already on the path to be a hero. Izuku said. The sun was starting to set. Izuku knew his mom would begin to worry and message him soon. It felt wrong to leave All Might standing there. My boy, please don't say things like that. You have the heart of a hero, even if you fail to get into UA I will help you become one in another way. Izuku felt his phone ping for the first time. It was his mother wondering why he hadn't come home yet. He couldn't stall for much longer. All Might still stood before him. He blocked what remained of the sun, like the light couldn't get past him. All Might, please, it's late and I really need to get home. You don't need to pity me, saving Kiken was enough. Izuku said. All Might didn't move. That's understandable, but please think about it. Maybe a good night's sleep will help you think. Please find me here tomorrow, we can discuss it deeper then. All Might said before he stepped out of the way. Izuku hurried past him and on the road to his house. As he passed the number one he said. I don't want your quirk, All Might, I'm going to go beyond without one. I hope you find a great successor. I really do, but it's not me. Don't waste your time. Once round the corner, Izuku stopped. His shoulders curled in on themselves as he inhaled. He couldn't move his feet as the conversation replayed in his mind. Why hadn't he just caved and accepted All Might's offer? It would make his life so much easier. He'd finally have a quirk, except that was why Midoriya declined the offer. He shook his head, confused about what he should have done. Sleep sounded nice right now, that was all that on his mind. He exhaled and continued his walk home. The beach was lonely. It had been the town's local dump for longer than Izuku could remember. That was the reason no one liked walking down here. The moon reflected on what remained of the sea. It was silent other than the wind's harsh blows that chilled Izuku to the bone. He hurried onwards. Approaching his house, Izuku fumbled in his pockets for his keys. He slid them into the lock when he found them and twisted. The door swung open and warm air hit Izuku's face. He walked into the room and left his bag on the floor. Mum, I'm home. He called before heading to the kitchen where he knew she would be. Inko, true to his suspicions, was in the kitchen. His mother was bent over the kitchen counter with the rice pot in her gloved hands. Upon his call, she turned around and dropped the food on the mat. Izuku. I just saw the news, please tell me you're okay. I was so worried, but I'm glad you're okay. I'm making katsudon for you. Especially seeing as it must have been a difficult day today. Inko said. She filled in the silence Izuku didn't even have time to make. He slipped into his seat on the table. I met All Might today. Izuku cut in. Inko went silent, letting her child speak. He told me I should be a hero and that I just needed a quirk. He trailed off, trying to decide whether he should tell his mom. He raised a hand to tell her that he was thinking. After a minute he put it down. He offered me his quirk, so I could become the next All Might, and I said no. I feel idiotic about it now. If I said yes you wouldn't have to pay as much hero tax and I'd have an easier time getting a job, but it felt so wrong. Izuku finished. Inko abandoned the food and slid down beside him. Izuku, he shouldn't have been allowed to say that to you. Izuku looked up. What do you mean? Imagine a stranger said to you. You can't be a hero because you're quirkless, but if you get a strong quirk I think you'd be a great hero. What does that sound like to you? Izuku narrowed his eyes. All Might didn't say that though. He worded it in a kinder way, but that was still his intention. What does that sound like? Quirkism. Exactly, and Izuku Midoriya, you do not take shit from quirkists. Izuku laughed. Thanks mom, he said. Inko ruffled his hair in return. It's what any mother would do. Now come and help me with this katsudon, she stated before standing back up to the rice pot. Izuku followed soon after to help. When they opened the pot and steam filled the room, they laughed. Izuku Midoriya didn't listen to podcasts at night. He'd rather spend those few hours browsing heroes forums to see what heroes had been up to. He had gone there at first, but all he found had been about the villain attack earlier that day. Looking at the pages brought up plenty of feelings of doubts Izuku was trying to not think about right then. And, present Mike dragged the word out, it's time for a few lucky callers to come through. Remember, if you want a chance to be featured on Put Your Hands Up Radio, call XXXXXXXXXXXX. We are taking caller number 1 right now. There's silence for a bit over the line. Izuku wondered if the caller knows they've gone through before there's a giggle. We're through. The caller yells, "Hi Mike. This is like our 4th time trying, let me grab my friend, hang on." There's a pause while the caller grabs her friend. There's a fair bit of yelling before the two are ready. So, did you two have any questions you wanted to ask today? Mike asks to get the ball rolling. The girl hums. Yeah, we were wondering how you started the radio show thingy. Someone. Their friend yelled in the background, hey. You can't think of any ideas either. Fine. Neither of us have any ideas, so we were wondering how do you come up with things to talk about every day? You teach at UA and school drains us. Present Mike already has an answer for when they finish. Well, I talk about anything that happened to me, including all the draining stuff. On the rare occasion, why husband runs out of jelly packets, or if present meow doesn't run away to be fed like a dog. I talk about things that I randomly remember. When I first started out I read out my grocery list. People seem to think pros only ever buy expensive brands, but I live with a slob. He leaves me with the shortest list of ramen brands he likes. And if you're stuck, Google things or ask people who listen to your show. The two people on the call seem to be taking notes if the frantic scribbles are anything to go by. Once he finishes they stop and the friend asks. Final question. When we finally get ourselves launched, can we DM you on Twitter for a shout out? Sure listeners. We need to move on now, but please DM us on @PutYourHandsUp when you launch. As present Mike hangs up, the girl starts telling her friend, see, it wasn't TH, before it cuts and their conversation is left for the public to assume. Mike chuckles before he picks up the next caller. They're another fan of the show and instantly bombard the host with questions. They varied from how his day had been, good. Had he seen the news recently? He had, and he hoped the listeners involved were okay. Who named his cat Present Meow? He did, and Present Meow was a dog, thank you very much. Izuku laughed at the last question. He left the app the podcast was on and searched up the hero's Twitter. It was mainly empty. There were tweets about what jobs he had completed. There were a few comment replies from other heroes about trips UA had gone on. He even sent a homework reminder for anyone in 2A who followed him. Midoriya was going to give up when the notification that Mike had just posted came up. An image of Mike with his arm slung around a border collie graced the page. His ridiculous glasses weren't on and he was out of hero gear. Who Izuku assumed to be Present Meow, his ears flapped about and his tongue stuck out. He was having the time of his life. The caption read, Present Mike is the human. Present Meow is the dog. Don't get confused. Izuku smiled at that. Mike went to pick up the next caller when he got the notifications. Instead of ignoring them and taking the person, he gasped dramatically. Now this is a quick addressment. You should never post on your partner's social media, unless they allow you. My husband is a perfect example of someone who just breached that trust. He shared an image of present Meow and I together. Fortunately, I can delete that image. Now, please can you not share that around? As a hero, it's rare people let me cross the road in my hero gear unbothered. I could never deal with that, and heaven forbid my husband gets out of bed before 3 p.m. to do the shopping. In fact, I really need to talk about what to do about this mess. I think we ought to have a break. I'll be back in a minute. Music started to play through Izuku's headphones. Unlike the chaotic songs played in the day, the ones playing now were calmer. They were still wild, but there was less screaming. His head hit the pillow with a thud. His headphones stayed on his head, but eventually the music filtered out. Midoriya Izuku drifted off to sleep soon after. He wasn't sure when the headphones were removed from his head. But, he woke up halfway through the night without them on. It was weird, but his half-asleep brain didn't care as he sunk back into the pillows. He also didn't know how he got near. Izuku tried to go to town and study for any potential jobs he could get as a quirkless member of society. All Might in his small form in the same alleyway as before stopped him. He turned around and changed paths, heading back to the beach. Izuku clambered over the rubble and threw himself over a fridge. It hadn't been his intention to hide on the plastic beach all day. It was unfair for Inko to deal with him moping in his room all day. He sat on an abandoned seed. It was rotting and the seed was wet from when the tide came in. In that moment Izuku couldn't bring himself to care. He took out his notebook and started to scribble. It hadn't been in his plans to depict All Might's injuries, and he didn't want to remember that wound. He was doing it to make sure All Might was okay. That was all. Izuku's pen was halfway across the page when he stopped. He couldn't bring himself to continue. He no longer pursued heroics as a career. His thumb clicked the button on the pen as he forced himself to continue. He changed his position on the seat to get comfier. Except that nothing seemed to work. Izuku rolled off the soggy seat and lay in the plastic bottles, thriving in his natural habitat. The rubbish. The notebook lay discarded on his face. It blocked the sun from his eyes. Even if the pages were thin enough, he could make out what happened above him. A bottle dug into his skin. By his hip was a plastic bottle lip sticking up and into his back. He flung his hand off his chest to remove it. He accidentally moved too fast. Izuku's whole body might have been levitating on that singular bottle. When it was removed, he fell to the ground with a thump. The bottles rattled together before finally molded to Izuku's body. They soaked the back of his shirt. Being squished forced them to remove any excess water stored in them. Had the fall been more dramatic, a ball of water could have formed around Izuku and shielded him from the world before he inevitably got soaked. He tipped his head back and let the green mop land in the puddle of salt water. Izuku didn't know how long he lay there for while avoiding All Might and questioning his life so far. When a brown-haired girl accidentally stepped on his hair, he was taken out of the daze. Her cheeks were pink and she quickly hopped off. "Oh. I'm sorry, I didn't know someone else was here," she exclaimed. Her hands wavered like mad as she did many actions. Taken by shock, Izuku did exactly the same thing. No. It's fine. There was just a guy waiting in an alley, so I hid here so I didn't have to face him. You can do what you want. I'll leave now," Izuku said. He started to walk away when she spoke again. "I planned on cleaning the beach and well, nothing here is your rights." Izuku's eye widened before he picked up his notebook from where it had fallen. Once that was securely in his hand, he offered his free hand for the girl to shake. "I'm Midoriya Izuku, I live nearby so you might see me around. If you ever need help, just well, I'd say call for me, but I don't really want you yelling my name." She laughed and took his hand. "I'm Yurika Ochaco. My parents have a building site nearby so I'll be around here a lot. I'll make sure to wave if I see you and need help." The two's hands slipped apart and Midoriya started to walk away. He only stopped at the faint call of, "It was a pleasure meeting you," from Yurika. "It was a pleasure meeting you as well," Izuku responded before he began to run in the opposite direction to the local library. He approached the shortcut he normally took and peered down. To his annoyance, the skeletal figure still couldn't take a hint, so Izuku was forced to take the long route round. The cityscape was empty, rush hour having passed an hour beforehand. Izuku crossed the streets without the whiz of cars threatening to run him over. He continued his journey on the footpath before he saw the reading library. He pushed the door open. A few students played a quiet game of cards while a few adults sat straight on chairs with a book in their hands. Izuku looked up to see the signs before he scrambled into the nonfiction section. The books were clunky and twice the size of his palms. He traced a finger around the letters before finding Q. Queens of England, quick ways to remove stains. Izuku looked past all the questionable or weird books people had written before he found the one he wanted. Quirkless Statistics and History. Izuku pulled it out. The book fell into his hands and he hauled it up so he hugged it against his chest. He shuffled towards the beanbag in the corner of the section and collapsed. He flipped the pages open and balanced them on his knees. The letters were small but Izuku could still read the contents page. Scouting for the information he wanted, Izuku lifted a clump of page. He landed on Chapter 7, Why the Unemployment Rate is So Low, and How It Doesn't Help the Apprentice. It's a well-known fact that 75% of the quirkless population in Japan is unemployed. The government will try and pass this as a standpoint of us being less experienced. Those with quirks offer better security measures, which ultimately comes to the question: is this true? It isn't. A study in 2132 showed that the quirkless are just as intelligent as anyone with a minor intelligence quirk. The study had users with mental, mutations, transformation, emitter and no quirks all sit a pre-quirk era exam. Those with mental quirks scored the highest, ranging from 100% correct and 60% right in. Those with emitter, transformation and no quirk all scored around 40%-70%. The majority of higher scores came from those with no quirk. The mutations scored varied from being 10% to 60%. These were linked that more animalistic their brains, the lower they scored. The physical appearance had nothing to do with this. We can assume that quirks have no effects on the brilliance of one's minds. Which asks the question, how can the opportunities open for those with quirks be compared to those without? It comes down to how society ranks quirks. One with a weak quirk will never prosper in the way one with a strong quirk will. But, when looking between two candidates, we assume one without a quirk to be weaker. This leads to a cycle of those with quirks always being chosen over us. This gives us a low employment rate, which makes us seem dumber than those with quirks. Systematic quirkism is also seen with those who own villainous quirks. Our system promotes choosing purely based off the best fit for the job. Yet a McDonald's worker is still required to share their quirk. The system is doing nothing to help us, if they are not actively oppressing us. Izuku placed the book down. He lifted himself off the beanbag and headed over to the desk. He heaved the book onto the desk and looked at the librarian. "Can I take this out?" he asked. The librarian smiled and nodded. "Is this for a school project?" she asked as she scanned the barcode. Izuku shook his head while he took back into his hands. "No, I'm just interested." "All right, that's where we'll leave off for the day. Thanks so much for listening along with me today. If you enjoyed, please like and comment down below. It really helps with the algorithms. I look forward to seeing you next time. Ciao for now, lovelies."